Imagine this. Your family is forced to leave everything behind, your home and your entire life, because staying means facing war, persecution, slavery, and unimaginable hardship. You make the impossible choice to cross the Mediterranean Sea, risking everything for the chance at asylum. But instead of rescue, you're met with violent pushbacks or the unthinkable, being left to drown. Today, we have a conversation with an organization on the front lines of this crisis, a group of everyday heroes answering the call when others turn away. Some of you may be thinking, this is about immigration. No, this is about search and rescue to save lives. For over 9 years, Sea-Watch has been on the front lines of the world's deadliest border, conducting search and rescue missions. But why is this crisis happening? Who is responsible? And what can we do to help? In this episode, we sit down with Giulia Messmer from Sea-Watch. Saving lives at sea should never be something you need permission to do. Welcome to Good Viral. Thank you for joining the conversation.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of our Good Viral podcast. We're really excited to have Giulia joining us. We're talking about refugees, migration, immigration, some things that could be quite controversial. But when it comes down to it, Sea-Watch is saving people's lives, and that's the attractive part to us. So first, I'm just going to ask you, Giulia, tell us why your organization exists, sort of a little bit of the origins, and what it is that's so compelling about the work that you all are doing.
So firstly, thank you so much for the invitation into the podcast. Sea-Watch basically is doing search and rescue in the central Mediterranean Sea. So at Europe's external borders between Italy, Libya, and Tunisia. And what we're doing is we are having 2 ships with which we are saving lives, saving people from distress at sea. But we're also operating 2 airplanes. And with those 2 airplanes, we are monitoring human rights violations that are happening basically every day in the sea by European actors such as the agency Frontex, by coast guards, but also, of course, in cooperation with the so-called Libyan Coast Guard, with the Tunisian National Guard, and other Libyan militias. So we're really putting attention to a geographical area where other civil society actors cannot be, because it's on sea and you can't just go by boat and monitor and be present, but you really need to have an operational assets. So that's why we're here.
Didn't quite think about how big basically the Mediterranean Sea is. I've been there by myself. I swam in the ocean and everything. And we've heard a lot about the refugees in the news and all of this stuff. And it's quite big. It's kind of hard to patrol, I guess you could say, the seas to try and find people who may be in distress. And you have so many things at your disposal, which is so cool. You have various ships, you have some planes, some aircraft, and you're working with all these other organizations, which I think is great. And I just kind of want to put out a big thank you to you guys, because I was looking at your website and I was just completely blown away. You know, on your website, you mentioned that in 2023, just your aircraft alone had sighted 16,000 people at sea, which is about 311 boats. That's almost one a day. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of operation. So it would be great to hear a bit of a story of, you know, when a boat is sighted, when people are in distress, you know, they're trying to find a place that's a bit safer and giving themselves better lives. And what happens when a vessel is spotted and these people are in distress? What's the next step?
I mean, I think firstly, I have to say that like Sea-Watch, like us, we're trying to support people fighting for their right, fighting for their right to claim asylum, because everyone in this world should be able to flee to another country to claim asylum. And this is like the most important thing for us. We are doing basic humanitarian work. So where we really have to put the attention is to borders that kill people and that refrain and that hinder people to claim their right or their rights. So when people flee through over the central Mediterranean Sea, they mostly flee from Libya or Tunisia. This is the area of operation that we are covering. Of course, they're also fleeing from Turkey, for example, to Greece, but this is not where Sea-Watch is present. When we see people fleeing from Libya and Tunisia, we see them fleeing by different sorts of boats. So they can be dinghies, for example, but they also can be metal boats. And they each have their different, very, very dangerous elements to it. Dinghy boats, for example, can deflate. They are very unstable. metal boats are very, very poorly put together. So once water enters into metal boats, there's basically an immediate sinking. So when people are getting onto boats and trying to flee over the central Mediterranean, because there is no safe passage, they cannot just go into an airplane, and fly to Tunisia like I could or I did already in the past. I just went to an airplane. I didn't even need a visa. I just flew to the country and then I got a stamp in my passport and that's it. And people that are trying to flee to seek safety, seek asylum, seek a better life cannot do that. So when they enter those dinghies or metal boats, mostly there's no life-saving equipment at all. So there's no proper life jackets. There's no navigation system. There's often not even someone that drove a boat before. So you can imagine that these boats basically are in distress when they enter the sea, because there's basically no way of boats arriving safely in any kind of weather. On Lampedusa, for example, that's the small island or small Italian island in front of Italy. There's Sicily, where lots of people are arriving as well. Then when people are fleeing, it takes mostly a few days. It's not that much of a distance. It's a few hundred kilometers from Libya, more from Tunisia. But when people are fleeing, they take several days mostly. And this can, of course, or has, of course, a lot of dangers. There's not only the winds and the waves, so bad weather coming up. There's also the mix of salt water and fuel that is present in those different boat types. So, and when salt water and fuel mixes, it creates this very, very poisonous, acidic fluid that burns skin. So what we see when we rescue people is not only dehydration, is not only sunburns, but it also is actual burns from the salt water and fuel mix. Wow. And then when people are at sea, we spot them, for example, with our airplanes. They are spotted or they are registered by Watch the Med Alarm Phone. Watch the Med Alarm Phone is a emergency hotline, basically, for people in distress at sea, so people can call. And then this initiative, which is super relevant in our area of operation, registers their call, registers their coordination, and informs all state authorities, obviously, but also all civil actors in the area and also all other actors like merchant vessels, for example. Oh. When we get then information about the coordination of a boat in distress, either we check them out with our airplanes to monitor their situation, or when the Sea-Watch 5, our biggest vessel, or the Aurora, our smaller vessels, are operative, we take course to this boat in distress. And then, of course, we try to rescue. But not only us are trying to get to those boats, also the so-called Libyan Coast Guard, for example, or other Libyan militias. So there's, for example, the Tarek Ben Zayed militia that is also present at sea. And there's other groups that I won't get into now, but it's a very complex mix of different groups and the so-called Libyan Coast Guard that are EU financed. So the European Union giving financial means and giving technical means to Libyan militias that are trying to intercept people trying to flee to Europe. And these interceptions are a very big danger on the central Mediterranean Sea, because what we see is very, very violent and dangerous behaviors by those militias. We see them intercepting boats and getting people on the ships and getting them back to Libya, a country where they just fled from, meaning people are being forced back, being abducted back into torture camps, into slavery, into death, into possible sexual violence. Wow. Yeah, and so not only the journey by very dangerous put together boats, very unstable boats is there, but also being actually forced back to a country where you just fled from by so-called Libyan Coast Guard, by different Libyan militias. But once we get to a distress case, we actually deploy fast rescue assets. So we have 2 speedboats, basically. They are much, much smaller than our motherships. And we approach the distress cases firstly with those speedboats. We have approximately 4 crew members on those speedboats that check them out first. And the first thing we do is distribute life jackets, because people do not have life-saving equipment. And if the boat capsizes, people are in the water, people possibly cannot swim, people drown. So it's like, for us, like the very first thing, the most urgent matter is to distribute life-saving equipment. And when we did that, we shuttle them back to the mothership. So, for example, to the Sea-Watch 5, where they are taken care of medically, where they receive a blanket, a bottle of water, and can like calm down after like this sometimes days-long journey before we then go into an Italian port and try to get them safely to European land.
My first question, I suppose, is that you were talking about this distress phone number or whatever is this, right? So I'm assuming that these people are, well, maybe it's a question really of how many people are given this phone number directly and said, look, if you are in true distress, call this number. Is that, and then if with all these risks that are out there and the knowledge that, of course, it's sort of a race between people that might actually help you or people that might actually make your situation much worse, are there also a lot of people that literally, even in distress, avoid using that phone call?
So the phone call that I was talking about is a phone number by a civil society initiative. So this is not state-led. This is an initiative that founded itself in 2014 because of the lack of rescue efforts by European states, basically. And because people saw there's thousands of people dying in the Mediterranean and states withdraw their rescue efforts because it's a politics of drowning. It's a politics of ignorance. It's a politics that intentionally lets people to die at sea so they are not reaching European shores. So Watch the Med alarm phone tries to really advocate and make this phone number public and make people aware that they exist. So when people are in distress at sea, they can really reach out to them, and then they can reach out to state actors, like I said, as well as civil actors in the area.
Would you say it's common, though, that people know about the existence of this before they set off? Do they generally know?
I don't have actual numbers, how many people know of the civil society initiative and how many people don't. We, of course, only see the phone calls that they register and the end that got forwarded to us. But that's there are definitely dozens of boats that actually know about the phone number itself. So alarm phone really does really great work in reaching out to people.
Right. And then if I understood you correctly, what you're saying is that once for example, people use this, there are others, again, that are able to receive that distress call. And so did I understand that correctly? That literally becomes a race between, you might say, good people and bad people trying to get there first. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, that's pretty safe to say. But I think what I really have to stress here is that the so-called Libyan Coast Guard or other Libyan militias do not randomly get the coordinates of those boats in distress. They don't have they don't have drones, they don't have airplanes. So when they actually reach and intercept boats in distress, like, we have to wonder, where did they get those coordinates from? Because you don't just go out by boat, also by speedboat, to the Mediterranean Sea. As you said, is a huge area. Only the central Mediterranean is a huge area. So if you find a boat, you must have had the coordinates from somewhere, or actually some who. This some who, if I can call it like that, is often Frontex, is the European Border Agency. They are there's evidence published by German news outlets, but also international news outlets, that Frontex actively cooperates and communicates with Libyan militias to communicate those coordinates of boats in distress. And only because of this communication, the so-called Libyan Coast Guard can intercept so many boats in distress at sea and abduct people back into this vicious cycle of violence.
Just a quick interruption, but don't worry, we'll get back to Giulia in a moment. If today's conversation has moved you, here's how you can take action with Sea-Watch right now and make a difference in the lives of refugees who are crossing the Mediterranean. Consider supporting their life-saving missions by donating to Sea-Watch, investing in the future of the Mediterranean, where your contributions help fund rescue missions, operations, and humanitarian efforts in one of the world's most dangerous migration routes. Every dollar makes a difference. You can also volunteer with Sea-Watch and experience firsthand the impact of the urgent work as a crew member or other marine skills on ship or on site. Whether you're on the ground or from afar, you can be part of the solution. Visit seawatch.org to donate and invest in the future of the Mediterranean. You can volunteer and learn more about how you can stand in solidarity with those risking everything for a chance at a safer life. Link to the website is in the description of where you're seeing or listening to this podcast. Now, back to Giulia for more compelling stories. When I was perusing your website a bit, I saw you have a store, which is another way anyone can go and support Sea-Watch, is to go and purchase really cool shirt and hoodie. And one of the hoodies had a slogan that said, F Frontex. And I was like, oh, what's Frontex? So I had to do a quick Google search because as an American, I just wasn't familiar with it. So just quickly to kind of understand is that it's basically a European border control, but it's a private company. Is that correct?
It's a European agency, so it's financed by the European Union.
Okay, gotcha. And they just kind of make sure, or that in their eyes, they're making sure that the borders are pretty much sealed and people are coming in and out and that they shouldn't in some way.
Yes, correct. So the European Union is using Frontex as a border agency to shut down borders, basically, and to build up a European border army that really tries to prevent migration by any means. And you don't only see this in the central Mediterranean, but also in the Aegeus, so between Greece and Turkey, or between Turkey and Greece, and also on the so-called Balkan route, so overland, basically, when people are trying to get to the European Union overland. And Frontex is present in all of those places and is pushing back people. So basically, when people are crossing the borders, Frontex is bringing them back, pushing them back over the border, which is highly illegal under international law, but happening on a very frequent basis. So there's, for example, proof of this in the Aegeus in cooperation with the Greek Coast Guard. There's proof of this on the so-called Balkan route with border guards of different Eastern European states. And these pushbacks are also very, very violent and deadly oftentimes.
So the work that you all do, I imagine it's impossible just to go out and just save people and not have to be involved in some level with the political challenges, the political, in some ways, fight with the various governments, with Frontex. Can you explain about that a little bit, about your organization, that there's probably a certain group of people or percentage of organization that's committed to understanding the laws the way that they are, to trying to work around them, to trying to deal with the challenges presented by the governments, by the militias, by the border control, Frontex, and so on?
So Sea-Watch is not only working on an operational level, so we're not only working as a humanitarian organization, but we're also advocating for political change. That means we are advocating in public society, in civil society, by our media work, by our press work, but we also really actively trying to advocate for political change by advocacy work. So talking to politicians, getting information about our operations, about our human rights monitoring, about the human rights violations that we witness and that we document on a daily basis in the central Mediterranean, etc. And of course, we're not the only organizations doing that. There's a whole civil fleet that built up during the last 10 years because of the politics of dying and ignorance at the European borders, not only by the European Union itself, but of course also by member states. So what we face frequently is political repression by different means. So you might have heard also about like the new neo-fascist government in Italy, led by Giorgia Meloni. And Giorgia Meloni and the coalition implemented a new law in January 2023, or first it was a decree, and then now it's a law. And this decree actively tries to hinder civil search and rescue efforts. So to keep us out of the area of operation, to make our rescue efforts more costly and prolong it. So really playing with the weapon of time, basically, because what is crucial in the Mediterranean is time. Time is the absolute most important thing to rescue people out of distress. This is also what you saw now with, for example, the yacht Balasian, which sank also in the central Mediterranean with different multimillionaire friends and family of his on it. And there were rescue efforts launched in minutes. And we as an organization, of course, like support any kind of rescue effort for anyone, but these rescue efforts should be implemented for anyone, regardless of their race, regardless of their money, of their nationality and passport. And this is just not what we're seeing right now. But yeah, when it comes to criminalization of rescue efforts, you really see creative minds, creative politics that tries its different ways. If it's like, or when it's very outspoken by, for example, the criminalization efforts by former Interior Minister of Italy, Salvini, Matteo Salvini, who is now Transportation Minister, or when it's the politics basically of silence, of silencing us through detention time. And what we're seeing right now in Italy is really a politics of detention, of blockade. Our Sea-Watch 5 was just recently blocked for 20 days again because we rescued, because we followed international law. There's no other reason but rescuing. And there's different argumentations, of course, used. So in this case, for example, it was because we apparently didn't wait for permission to rescue. And this is completely absurd. You do not need permission to rescue. If you are on the highway and you see an accident, you are not like, oh, maybe I'm going to call authorities and wait what they say. Maybe I can stop and call an ambulance or not. No, of course you stop and you call an ambulance because time is crucial. And this is just exactly the same.
Just so that everyone, including myself, understood you correctly, is there's a rescue mission that happens, and then some governments, specifically probably Italy, detains the ships basically and make sure that you can't go out for a certain amount of days. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. So this new law and decree published in 2023 that I just mentioned has different obligations and regulations on it. And one of them is, for example, that you have to go to a port immediately after rescue. So after the first rescue that you conduct in the Mediterranean, you get assigned a port and you have to go to the port. And well, thinking like your first thought might be, oh, but that's great, no? Like you immediately get the port and you could just immediately disembark people. But what it actually means and says in a very bureaucratic way is that the captain and the crew of our ships have to ignore any other distress case that we might know about because we need to go straight into port and we usually don't get permission to do another rescue. And what Italy does, or Italian authorities, is assigning us ports that are very far away from our rescue area. So sometimes over 1,000 kilometers. And this means 4 to 5 days of just going and driving, sailing to the port. This means thousands of euros and dollars of fuel. And this means 4 to 5 days additional stress, additional, basically, a medical hazard, medical risk for people that we just rescued. And this really shows a politics of like making our lives as miserable as possible. But in the end, criminalization of search and rescue efforts, of civil search and rescue, is always a mean of blocking migration and of criminalizing migration. And this is why also we have to put a lot of attention to the criminalization of people on the move, of refugees arriving into Europe. There's hundreds of people sitting in Italian jails only because they are accused of driving or sailing their own boats, or in Greece also cars over the border. So basically they are criminalized because they are fleeing to safety. And there's not a lot of attention on it. So you might have heard of the shipwreck in front of Greece, in front of Pylos. There were 600 people, approximately, that drowned in a double-decker boat. So it has 2 decks. One is in the air and one is like underneath. And it capsized because of really negligent behavior of the Greek Coast Guard, and 600 people drowned. Due to this, after this shipwreck, not the Greek Coast Guard, not Frontex, who was also involved in the situation, was persecuted. But firstly, 9 people that were on the boat and fleeing themselves were criminalized and put into the public as scapegoats. And this is what we see not only in Pylos, but also in Italy, basically all around European borders, because we are scapegoating people and criminalizing them for our own actions.
There's a lot of knowledge that just dropped. Wow. Thank you for telling us all of that pieces.
So it seems to me that as far as the work that you do, I mean, spend some time on the seas, sailing and so forth, and none of that is easy. So I know that the actual rescue attempts and everything that you physically have to do is not easy. But by comparison to the political efforts, it's very straightforward and very plain with the challenges that you all are facing on the political side are incredible. And it seems insurmountable in many ways when you have, for example, these governments that are being led by people who are literally trying to stop immigration at any cost, no matter what risk of life or what happens to these people, without any concern to them at all. And so this part is astounding, and it makes me really wonder. I remember reading on your website that you guys are 100% funded by donations. And of course, so that means that there's a lot of people out there that care very much about what you're doing. But how do people, as they learn about this and they become aware of this, how does the change happen? How does this insurmountable political problem get diminished?
I truly think this is not an insurmountable problem at all. It's very easy. Everybody deserves rescue in distress. That's it. It's a point. Everybody deserves rescue. Done. And it would also be politically changeable in an instance with first creating a European search and rescue program. So not putting this work and pressure on civil society actors to actually go out and rescue, because this is not our task. Like, we don't want to do this. We want to abolish ourselves. We don't want to be there saving people of drowning, because they shouldn't be drowning in the first place. So what we need in the long run is safe passages, no? And a legal right to move and to come into the European Union and to claim asylum. And this is what could be legally implemented very, very easily, but it's not. And it's not implemented politically because of political willful choices. And this is why at the moment I really believe in pressure by civil society, pressure by movement building, pressure by everybody gets up and does what they can do. If it's donating, if it's awareness raising on social media, if it's talking to your racist uncle at the dinner table and talking about sea rescue at the borders of the European Union, or what is happening with ICE in the US, what is happening at the borders of Mexico and the US, what is happening in Australia, because what the European Union is doing, what European member states are doing, this is not a singular event in our world. And this is happening across borders everywhere. And we really have to also get this complexity into our politics, basically. So I really believe everybody can do something. And this is also really, really necessary. And together we can create the pressure to really lead to political change.
Yeah. Thank you for that. As many of our listeners, including myself, are living in the States. Damien is in Spain, actually. And you're in Italy, is that correct?
No, I'm in Berlin, actually, at the moment.
Oh, you're in Germany. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we're kind of scattered a bit around the world. And I think that's a big question that a lot of our listeners and anyone really asks is they see all of this trauma and this death that's happening on the screen or on social media. And they ask the question, what can I do to help? And of course, there's donation. Of course, you're 100% funded by donation. And so we're always going to encourage people to go and donate, have those conversations with the racist uncles at the table, and talk about these things. So it's really interesting because I also saw on your website that there's volunteer opportunities as well. And I found this really fascinating because it's something I've never really thought about, of course. And you don't know what you don't know. And on your website, it showed people who have sea experience of some kind can actually go and volunteer and or work with vessels with your organizations to go and be part of rescue. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And perhaps if a story might come to mind of people who did join as volunteering for rescue missions and what their experience was like, what they were seeing.
I mean, I can't speak for everyone, obviously. Everybody also has their own experiences. But for me, volunteering on our ships and airplanes, but especially on our ship for the first time. We had a rescue in the early evening of a day in February or end of January. And it was a beautiful day. Like, you had really blue sky. You had a very calm sea. We were there with the Sea-Watch, or on the Sea-Watch 5, looking out with binoculars and searching for distress cases. And once the sun set and you had this huge fireball, like this super beautiful sunset, we spotted a boat in distress. We spotted a boat in distress with around 50 people, and then all the rescue efforts started to happen. So people were going around the ship, doing their tasks, getting ready to go on the speedboats, and checking out this boat and boat in distress, and then really trying to getting into rescue mode. Seeing those speedboats in the evening sun with this huge fireball was so absurd that I really just thought, well, I'm working with Sea-Watch since a couple of years now. I'm working mostly in the office, sometimes on our rescue vessels or on the airplanes. But every time you volunteer, it's as if you didn't see this situation on screen before. And sometimes it feels super distant and very absurd as well that you're there, that you even in this situation, and that you are in a place where states should be and you shouldn't be because it's not your actual task. And I'm guessing this feeling of anger that comes up in these moments, that people have to go through all of this, that people are put under pressure to do this work where we shouldn't do this work at all, and anger that people are traumatized where there could be planes flying over the Mediterranean to safety, is, I think, a very common denominator that I see with fellow activists, fellow comrades, fellow employees inside Sea-Watch, and also, of course, plenty of other organizations and initiatives working in support of people on the move.
Can you share with us? I think that, well, for me, right now it's overwhelming really to think about the difficulties of all of it. And as you say, the solutions are quite simple, but there's a lot of resistance. So it doesn't happen quickly, and it's all sort of the day-to-day fight. But I think one thing that might give us some encouragement, some hope, is if you could maybe share with us about an individual, about a person, or about a family, or a couple of people that were rescued and where it actually made a huge difference for them in having a better life. Can you share something about some real people so that we can sort of bring this home and sort of feel better about that the fight is worth it? You know what I mean?
I think the fight is worth it for every person that we rescue and that we can support. Getting into to European shores, and that's why we're doing it now. You always hear about 20,000 people have died, 25,000 people have died, 30,000 people have died. That people also forget that firstly, those numbers are people with wishes, with hopes, with dreams, with families, with lives, with jobs, with pets. And then you also forget about people that actually make it to European shores. And those people actually just start their fight against a system that is not only violent to arrive to, but also violent in going through. So the asylum system, the asylum detention centers that you see in Italy, but also in Germany, all over Europe, oftentimes very, very cruel in how they are working and how they are affecting people on many different levels. And I think from Sea-Watch perspective, we don't really we don't really work after our rescue efforts in the asylum system itself. So we don't follow people while they go through their asylum process. So there's oftentimes no follow-up, and also oftentimes no knowledge. Receive asylum, where are they now? Could families join, etc.? But I think what I really would like to share from our vessels is that we don't only have very intense rescue moments on those vessels, we share days of our lives with the guests on board. We share music, we share food, we share games that we play, we share talks, we share getting to know each other, teaching our different languages to each other. If it's Arabic, Bangladeshi, Farsi, German, Italian, English, etc., we really share a moment. And this is also what I really would like to emphasize, that like the human connection and the human point in all of this can't get lost, because as soon as we lose our empathy, we're basically done, because we can't relate to each other anymore. And of course, this is not only about being human, being moral, but this is about politics. And this all combined just makes the situation in the Central Mediterranean how we see it.
Yeah, thank you. As we wrap up our episode, I'm a history buff. And so a lot of my travels and my questions and my research usually goes into histories. And there's beautiful parts of histories, and then there's some ugly parts to history. And I think we're in the middle of a bit of the ugly right now. And so it would be really great to see resolution happening with all of this. And of course, donations going to help with that. And following you guys on social media, as well as checking out your website. Everyone who's listening and watching, please go to those areas, support Sea Watch, maybe even volunteer if you have sea experience. Hopefully we can get this resolved quickly. A lot of death has happened in our human history, and it probably will continue for some time. But today, from what I'm hearing, is that we can really make a big change if we continue to support organizations like yourself, Sea Watch, and also advocate for change in the political side. We're not a political podcast, but we do recognize that it's involved in a lot of the topics that we do cover. And so we are going to support people to be advocating for those changes with those political organizations. So those who are listening, please do those things. Do go to Sea Watch website, which is the link in the description, and go and check it out, donate, volunteer, share with a friend. I also saw some really creative ways that people can help fundraise with you, which was really cool. And there's all these options. So everyone who's listening, please go and do that. Giulia, thank you so much for being on this podcast with us and really enlightening us on what's really happening out there on the seas and how people are really being affected by negligence in a lot of ways, and how you guys are really stepping up as heroes. So we want to give a huge thank you to you, your organization, and those who are volunteering to be the heroes, to really help those who are in need. So thank you for that.
Thanks for the invitation again. And maybe just as closing words, because we hear this hero narrative so much. And I just really want to emphasize that our work is work that has to be done. There's nothing hero-like about it, really. It's work, it's a job, it's activism. Is like people are active in the fire departments or in the medical departments, in hospitals, etc. But also people cleaning houses, people being like so integral to our society. Humanitarian work is just another work, and we can really leave the hero narrative out of it, because it has to be done. It has to be, people need to be supported. And also from a political and historical perspective as well. Now, Anastasia, you talked about like being really into history, and we have to recognize that the patterns and displacement occurs because of historical happenings, because of colonialism, because of extractivism and exploitation. So we really just support people in what they have a right for. That's basically it.
Thank you for listening to the Good Viral podcast and being part of the conversation. If you are inspired by this episode, go to our website at goodviral.org, where you can find resources and listings from the episode to continue good efforts.
Like, comment, and share this episode to any or all of your social media channels. It's really easy to take a small action, and maybe you'll inspire a big result.
When good goes viral, the world gets better.